Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So we are talking about the hurdles of current data citation practices and how persistent identifiers can help in this sense. The consortia SVD is the German abbreviation for Consortium for Social, Behavioral, Educational, and Economic Sciences. And what we are currently working, it's very much next to the idea about data sets. Because in social sciences, this is why I presented the context of our consort. The persistent identifiers, they are, in the most cases, are assigned to the data set. So once researchers, they will reuse data, they pretty much cite the data set, not exactly data they have used. So what we are claiming here is that assigning a PID to the role data set is not enough to unambiguously identify the piece of information that was used in the research, especially in secondary data. Secondary reuse data. So our goal in the consortia SVD task area 5, which is the technical solution, is provide tools to identify survey variables. This is a first approach. We have more. We have others usage for this tool, but in the first sense, we want to identify survey variables using one identification, one unique identifier, which is the PID. And I'm very glad that my previous colleagues already presented the PID concept, but now we are going to see this PID concept applied in a lower granularity level of data, not just at a data set. And this simplifies fair data management to boost subsequent citation. So talking about this persistent identifier concept, it's the way that you can identify digital object without this kind of message. So this is the bad dream for every researcher when you find something really interesting for your research and then the link is broken and you cannot reach the data. So this is why persistent identifiers are useful. And here is one example. This example, you might take a look here. It's a DOI. It's one of the standards for PIDs. There are other standards, and we are working with handle system, which is another kind of PID. But here is just an example for those that are not familiar with the persistent identifier syntax, which is this label of the link. And talking about the research data granularity level that I mentioned before, we can imagine, for example, that the data set as a house. But when the researchers are going to reuse data, frequently they don't use the complete data set. But once they cite it, they cite the complete data set. So what exactly was the piece of data that was used? In this sense, what researchers use most frequently are, we could say, we could compare variables with the bricks of a wall. So the data set is the complete house, and then the bricks are the piece of information or where variables are stored in a data set. Bringing a more self-explained picture, what's most common now is study level, the DOI for studies, for papers, research in general. Usually they have a PID assigned to it, the data set as well. And what we are working now is to assign the PID for the variable level, and in the future, other entities also can have a PID assigned to them. for example, the question in a survey. The more specific PID is in the granularity level, less ambiguity it can become. Here are some examples about how researchers provide data citation. It's clear that they do not use or they do not follow any standards. For example, in the first one, you can see that the identification was just the name of the study, just the name of the survey, which is ISSP 2008. The second one, the researcher or the author of the papers, he just cited or he quoted one part of the question, but it's not enough to identify exactly what variable was used. And in the sense of transparency that most of you has been today talking about it today, it does not help. It does not provide this transparency about the research. So this non-standard practice of citing variables, as those I just showed you, it leads to consequences such as making inefficient to the service provider to identify what are variables that are most useful, and it does not let the researcher easily to reuse variables. I have a small 2-minute video here with a use case, and then I will show you, and you can see how researchers struggle to provide all this documentation about the variables that they used when they do not have a PID.
Doris has written a paper with the new accumulation of the European values study. She only needs some variables from the extensive data file. Doris needs about 20 of the total 466 variables contained in the data file for her analysis. However, unique and stable links, persistent identifiers, to variables have not been available. In order to provide transparency in her research, she spent a lot of time and effort creating an appendix with the questions and response categories for all variables. The entirety of Doris' effort to ensure transparency must be described and detailed explained in her results documentation. In addition, Doris' reuse of data documentation will not enhance reproducibility as it could do if persistent identifiers were available and used to cite the data. Any scrutinized attempt could fail due to the misunderstanding on how and which data exactly was reused. The cited use case illustrates how challenging it can be to reuse data without adequate data level identification. Now, given the variables registry provided by Consort SWD, Doris needs to include only the persistent identifiers for the variables she has used in her new paper. By this, readers are enabled to directly and unambiguously access the variables used in the study. Further information can be linked, such as related variables from other waves or studies, questions or papers.
So this example shows us that variables in a tabular data format, how can PIDs can improve the citation for this kind of data, but it's not limited to only for this data type. For example, we can provide PIDs also for video segments. If you have a long video and you need to cite one part, one interviewed person, whatever, just you can also have the PID for this exactly part of the video that is most interest for you. Questions are also another entity level that can receive a PID and then improve data citation when reused. Measure scales. We also have some use cases that many people search for scales or for response scales to reuse in their own research. Audio segment as well. Audio files with transcripts, so this is the related, we can relate many entities and then provide the connections with these machine actionable features that are embedded in PIDs. And the registration service, for those who are more interested in the technical side, I led this video showing how does it work. If you're curious or would like to see behind the scenes how the PIDs are assigned to the variable level, you can access, it's in here and available in YouTube. And the outcomes that I would like each one of you take today is that PIDs at this variable level enable safe data citation, which is completely related to transparency and ethical research, improves findability, fosters reuse, and favors the reproducibility. But one last feature or one last advantage that I would like to highlight today is the getting data automatically. This is something that PID can really enable, because of course you can find and get access to the data, but it's a long way to get there. You have to find the data, access, apply for the permission, sometimes when it's applicable, of course, download the data set, realize what is the data set format, if you need any kind of software to open and to work with this data set. And at the end of this long process, you can exactly access the data you need. If you have a PID, you can do it automatically. So the data providers, they can provide these do files or R scripts, and then you can get the data automatically using these softwares. As an example, I just put here something that it's really familiar to everyone. So we can go from Cologne to Berlin, for example, in two ways. You can use the regional transportation, which will take you from one city to another in almost 10 hours. And you can reach the same city or do the same journey in less than 5 hours. It just depends on the mean of transportation, what kind of transportation you are using. So in this sense, PIDs, we could say that they are the faster train, the faster vehicle to reach another place. Those are some of our current use cases. Using PIDs at lower granularity level for one type of data or another. And there are many others as potential use cases as well. And with this, I reached the end of my presentation. Thank you.